As you probably suspect, I'm Zig Ziglar. Now, before we invite the live audience to participate in this presentation, I'd like to share some thoughts that are critical to your success in closing the sale. Number one, selling is a transference of feeling. If I can make you feel about my product like I feel about my product, if there's any way on earth you are going to buy my product. Now, Willie Dorsey, the great spiritual singer, puts it this way: brother, if you're going to be convincing, then you've got to be convinced. In other words, you transfer that feeling to others that your product, goods, or services are good. Now, there's a myth that's an absolute fallacy, and that is that a good salesperson can sell anybody anything. That's a con artist. A good salesperson, a professional, one who wants to build a career instead of just making a sale, clearly understands that you've got to have a conviction that what you're selling is in the best interest of that person who's buying. That way you render a service. That's what selling really is all about. Second point I'd like to make is simply this: prospects don't change their mind. Now, I know what many of you are thinking, but in reality, they make a new decision based on the new information which you give them. That's the reason the professional salesperson has a storehouse of additional information, because when the prospect says no, they're really saying no based on what they K-N-O-W. Now, you let them know more, and good closing involves education, then they're going to be knowing more and consequently buying more. Number three, the kind of person you are is critically important. A Harvard study recently reveals this: that the people who gain the most usable information from a presentation such as this one take good notes. That's number one. And number two, when it's over, they get with an associate or their boss or their trainer or their manager, and they brainstorm. So as you watch and listen, ask yourself these questions: how can I adapt and use this material old Zig's sharing with me in my career so that I can sell more today and be able to sell more tomorrow to the same people? Now, I'll tell you what let's do. Let's go to that live audience. Totally convinced that our major need in America today is leadership in the home. Goodness alive. All right. Okay. Thank you. Well, my goodness. Thank you very much. Okay. Sometimes when people stand up on me before I get started, I'm afraid they're about to leave me, so I'm glad to see you sit down. Now, I'm going to be asking questions as we go along. The first three closes involve selling you on what you do. Now, selling, and so I call this one the persuasion close. As I ask you these questions, some of them are kind of simple, but please do me a favor and respond to them. How many of you sell a pretty good product? Can I see your hands, please? All right. How many of you sell a extraordinarily good product? Can I see your hand? How many of you, ladies and gentlemen, sell a product that serves or solves a problem? Can I see your hand? How many of you believe that when you sell a product that solves a problem, you deserve a profit? How many of you believe that to sell two products to solve two problems, you deserve two profits? Can I see your hand? Okay. In other words, you believe that when you render a service, you deserve to be paid for it. Is that what you're saying? And what you're saying is, the more people I help, the more problems I solve, the more profit I deserve. Isn't that really what you're saying there? Okay, now I don't want to put words in your mouth because that's not sanitary. But that really is what you're selling or saying, all right? Now, how many of you have been selling for as long as a year? Can I see your hand? All right. How many of you still got all of the money that you've earned in the last 12 months? Can I see your hands? Okay? Let me ask you a question. How many of you got clients or customers whom you sold a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago that are still using and enjoying the benefits of what you sold to them all those years ago? Can I see your hand? Now, the next question is the critical one. How many of you believe that the customer was the biggest winner in the transaction? All right, then if that is the case, is the sales process something you do to somebody, or is it something you do for somebody? Now, when you understand that, you're in position to begin to close the sale. Now, let me tell you what I just did. I just did something that is extremely important in selling. You know, a lot of times we convince people that our product, goods, or services are the best, but we don't persuade them to take action. How do you persuade? Well, let's go back in history and look at a couple of gentlemen named Aristotle and Galileo. Aristotle was a brilliant man, but he came up with a very foolish concept. He believed that if you drop two weights of different sizes but made out of the same material, that they would fall at different rates of speed. That's what they taught at the University of Pisa for years and years and years. And then a young whippersnapper named Galileo came along, and he said, that's crazy. The students and professors said, why, you're off your rocker. Why, Aristotle said, and he said, well, let's go to the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and let's take a look and see. He took two different sized objects of the same material, he dropped them, and they obviously fell at exactly the same rate of speed. He had convinced them beyond any doubt that what he was saying was absolutely right. But he did not persuade them to take action. Now, what am I getting at? How do you persuade people? You don't persuade people by telling them. You persuade them by asking them. You see, had I started by saying that you as salespeople really render a service, you would say, yeah, but I do okay too. Hey, you do all right, and that's fine. That's part of the equation. That's the reason I went through that little routine about how many of you sell a pretty good product. That is so important. You see, that sales process is something you do for someone. It is not something you do to someone. So I'd like to tie that in selling you on you to another attitude close, because you're the most important part of this equation. For a couple of years, I fought in the ring. One of the things and incidentally, I had a pretty good record. As a matter of fact, the worst I ever finished was second. Now, the only reason I quit was because of my hands. The referee kept stepping on them. Well, anyhow, in athletics, what you do is you study the opponent's weakness and exploit it. That's true in football, basketball, boxing, tennis, whatever it is. You study their weakness and exploit it. In selling, you study their weakness, that is their need, and you strengthen it by selling them your goods or products or services. There is your difference right there. Now, what kind of person sells the most? What is involved philosophically in this? We've built our entire business on the concept that you can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want. You solve their problems, my friends, you're going to do all right. Now, please understand that's a philosophy and not a tactic. Where does character and integrity enter the picture? The Forum Corporation out of Boston, Massachusetts, did an exhaustive study on 341 salespeople. 173 of them were super successful. 161 of them, 173 were super successful. 168 of them were moderately successful. And they determined what made the difference. Now, all factors were equal in the two groups as far as experience and education and product and territory and all those things. But there were two major differences and reasons for their success. The first one was trust. You see, the reality is without integrity, people won't listen. Without trust, they won't follow, meaning they will not buy. Now, the question is, who do they trust? Now, this is so simple, it's going to be frightening. They trust the good guys and the good girls. They trust those people of character and integrity. The second major difference they discovered was this. The super successful salespeople, the career salespeople, clearly understand that the sale is not complete until the order is signed, the merchandise is delivered and paid for, and the customer is happy with it. In order for those things to happen, you have to have a team of support people, and most professional salespeople do not have a team. So when they call the office, they're just as courteous to the switchboard operator as they are the chairman of the board. They're just as nice to the file clerk and shipping clerk and collection lady or person as they are to any of the executives in the company. And they become a team, and everybody understands then that they're involved in the sales process. Now let's look at what I call the three-question close to kind of begin to tie some of these together. Let's assume in this close that you've demonstrated your product. And let's assume that you have demonstrated that it will save money. And so the three questions simply, can you see where using this product or service would save you money? Question number two, are you interested in saving money? And question number three, when do you think you ought to start saving the money? Now, exactly the same question will go with time and work and health. Can you see where this would be good for your health? Are you interested in taking care of your health? If you were ever going to start taking care of your health, when do you think would be the best time to start? That's the immediacy, having them into action right now. To give you a specific example of how that works, Don Jarrell from Garden Grove, California, represents a very fine, accredited vocational college. A man and his three daughters came in to consider enrolling in the college. The enrollment fee was roughly $16,000. Now, that's a pretty nice little piece of change. But Don had already determined that the man could well afford it, so he knew that price was not the problem. But he knew in order to persuade him to take action, he had to ask him questions that would lead him to the decision table, not run him or force him at the decision table. So he asked him very simply, do you invest in the stock market? The man said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. Then he said, do you consider the funds needed to put your daughters through school an investment or an expenditure? Now, I want you to notice he's tying the head and the heart together. Now, let me emphasize a point. People do make emotional decisions, but if you got some logic behind it, your chances of getting the sale are dramatically higher. Well, the man obviously said, well, I consider it an investment. Then very quietly, Don Jarrell said, and how much are your daughters worth as an investment? Now, what I'm encouraging you to do is to think in terms of adapting these and other questions to fit your product, goods, or services. Now, we look at the alternate of choice close here, and you will see that one will come up a number of times under several different circumstances. But let me encourage you, always think in terms, as I make a presentation or give you a close, think in terms of how can I use this, adapt it, adjust it to fit my particular goods, products, or services. How can I use this to fit my situation? That's the reason that brainstorming and thinking it through is going to be so enormously important. First time I heard of alternate of choice was old Elmer Wheeler many, many years ago. You know, he was a man who said, sell the sizzle and not the steak. Well, the Walgreens Drug Company, back during the Depression, hired him to help boost their sales. Now, in those days, the drugstore part of it, the soda fountain, was an enormously effective tool for bringing people in, and it was a great profit center. Well, in those days, before we had cholesterol, isn't it astonishing in our country today, the land of milk and honey, all we talk about is calories and cholesterol. But anyhow, Wheeler, they used to sell eggs and put them in the milkshakes, you know, in the malted milks and all. Well, in those days, you could buy a dozen eggs for 15 cents. When they put an egg in the shake, they charged them a nickel for it. So instead of asking them if they wanted an egg in it, Wheeler taught them to pick up 2 eggs and simply when they ordered a milkshake or malted milk, say, did you want 1 egg or 2? There was a dramatic increase, an explosion of business as a direct result of it. Alternative choice can be used in many ways. Did you want to handle this by check, or do you prefer to pay cash? Do you want to use a credit card, or do you want to put it on our budget system? Now, as you look at these, I'm going to go through a series of questions. Some are alternative choice closes. Some of them are just question closes, and some are the assumptive close. But notice some of these. If this were the only feature this machine had, it would be well worth owning, wouldn't it? Closing. When we install this equipment, would you like for me to demonstrate the major features again? Assuming. Would you like for me to mark this one sold while we check on the most agreeable terms to finance it for you? Now that injects just a slight amount of fear. What you're implying is it might be gone. And I'll say this several times, but the fear of loss is greater than the desire for gain. Don't take anything away from me. That's the reason in stores where they measure out food, we always teach them, put too small an amount on there first so you can add to it. Nobody wants to see things taken away from them. That's selling, all right? Another close. Do you need to consult with anyone else before you place the order? Is the purchase order issued from this department? Would you like to have your own bank finance this, or would you like for us to work out the financial arrangements? Since the item is in short supply, would you be willing to wait for 3 weeks for delivery? Would you want to make a large deposit so the monthly deposits are smaller, or would you prefer a minimum deposit and slightly larger monthly deposits? Would you prefer this in green, or does the red appeal to you most? Again, I challenge you, use your imagination. Think of your products and services, and in your quiet thinking time, think it through. And as you brainstorm, come up with other questions. Shall we ship it by motor freight or air express? Do you want this lot registered in your name or your wife's name? Do you prefer the lot on the golf course, or does the one on the lake appeal to you most? If you saw that it was to your advantage to own this product and the terms we work out are satisfactory, would you have any objection to going ahead today? Can you see the financial advantage to reducing the use of those powerful overhead lights which provide unneeded light in some areas in favor of using point-of-impact lighting during certain times of the day? Do you believe it's wise to invest in solidly constructing equipment which will give you long, trouble-free operation for the lifetime of the product? Now, those are questions that can be asked, but let me say it again. People do not change their mind. They do make new decisions. I asked that redhead of mine. Now, my wife is a decided redhead, meaning one day she just decided that she is going to be a redhead. By her preference, when I talk about her, I always call her the redhead. When I talk to her, it's Sugar Baby, and her name is Jean. I asked her to marry me, and she said no. I asked her the second time, no. Third time, no. Fourth time, no. Fifth time, no. Sixth time, she said yes. But she never changed her mind. What she did was make a new decision. Now, psychologically, you as salespeople need to understand that. When a person says no, and you just sit on them and say, oh, you know you like it, go ahead, you're just irritating them because they've already decided no, and they're not going to change their mind. Now, if you give them new information, which enables them to make a new decision, you see, a wise person changes his mind, and I think everyone knows that, but they change it for a reason, and we've got to give them those reasons. Now, let me give you a specific example as I ask you this, and let me get you to respond. How many of you would give me $100 for an item you absolutely knew was worth only $20? That's foolish, isn't it? All right? Now, understand the sale is made in the mind of the prospect. When they're saying no, in most cases what they're saying is based on what you've told me thus far, I'm not going to give you my big stack of money for the little value you offer me in the product. Now, you give me more value, and I'll separate myself from my money. And so every time you use a new clothes or new information, you build value and value and value and value. And only when the value gets above the price do you have a legitimate prospect. That's where you start closing the sale. Now, let's look at some closes that deal with specifically how to overcome the price objection by using your voice inflection. Now, as a matter of curiosity, how many of you ever get a price objection? Can I see your hands, please? All right. Now, let me say this. When you use the right words and you're selling the right product, and use the right inflection in your voice, then you've got an infinitely better chance of making the sale. Let me say that those voice inflections can completely change the meaning and intent of words. For example, how many of you realize that in the Bible it clearly says that man was born cursing? Did you know that? If you don't believe it, look it up. It's Job 3:1, and it clearly says, and Job cursed the day he was born. Now, the only thing is that little comma is not in there. When you took the comma and put it in, that completely changed the meaning. For example, let's take something like, I did not say he stole her money. Now, those are 8 words, and we can make them say 8 different things with voice inflection. This is why good professional salespeople need a cassette recorder, so they can record their presentation and listen to their voice and listen to that voice inflection. For example, when I say, I did not say he stole her money, that's just a statement of fact. But alter it slightly, I did not say he stole her money. Completely different meaning. Or, I did not. That's a vehement denial. Say he stole her money. Or, I did not say he stole her money. Completely different. Or, I did not say he stole her money. That was a rascal over there that did it. Or, I did not say he stole her money. You know, he's going to put it back. I mean, he's just borrowing it. Or, I did not say he stole her money. It was hers that the rascal stole. Or, I did not say he stole her money. It was a diamond ring the rascal got. Now, you see, we took 8 words in one sentence, made them say 8 entirely different things. And when you become a serious student of selling and learn what those voice inflections are and how you can handle them, it makes a dramatic difference. Charles Osgood says, compared to the spoken word, Charles Osgood says, compared to the spoken word, a picture is a pitiful thing indeed. Words move people. They move them emotionally. Now, if you can put the word and the picture together, now we're in business. Now, different prospects will object differently. For example, one prospect might stomp his foot in essence and say, that price is ridiculous. How many of you ever had somebody, really respond in a manner like that? Another one might say, well, it seems to me the price is a little high. You might have a good old boy down home type fella, and he might say, you folks kind of proud of that stuff you sell, ain't you? Now, they're all talking price, but you handle them in a totally different way. The one who says that price is ridiculous, you don't argue with him. You don't say, no, it's not either. You repeat what they said, but you do it this way. You lower your voice, you look them right in the eye, and simply say, the price is ridiculous? Now, that sounded so simple, but you'll have to hear that a number of times to get that inflection right. What I did at the very end, my voice was rising. And what that does is it physically moves the objection back to the prospect side of the table. You are now selling on offense instead of defense because the prospect now has to defend their statement instead of you justifying the price. Now, because everything is selling, ladies, let me go ahead and tell you this, that works infinitely better even at home. For example, let's say that you beat your husband home. And you've had really a tough day, and as he walks in, you greet him warmly, of course. Give him a big old smooch, and then you back up about 3 steps, you look at him and a big old smile and say, honey, did you want to take me to Alamans or Farfallo's for dinner? He might say, I don't want to take you anywhere to dinner. You don't argue with him. You just simply repeat what he said. You don't want to take me to dinner, hon? It almost ain't fair. It really is not. Now, let's say that it's grass cutting time, and so you say to your 14-year-old, okay, son, it's time to cut the grass. I don't want to cut the grass. You don't argue with him. You repeat what he said. You lower your voice. You look him right in the eye and say, you don't want to cut the grass, son? I can absolutely guarantee, whether you want them to take their toys to the back room or cut the television set off or get the repair person to come out and repair the air conditioning on a brutally hot Friday night, I can tell you it works dramatically better. Now, let's look at it another way. Let's say that one prospect might say, well, you know, the price is a little bit high. Then we got a lot of different ways. For example, I call this the like it close. I simply say then, well, let me ask you, do you like it? And most things are, yeah, well, I like it. Well, Mr. Prospect, don't you believe that it's difficult to pay too much for something you really like? Well, they might say, well, you got a point, but yeah, I think you can pay too much for something you really like. But you've just crossed a little barrier. You now have got them thinking along these lines. And let me point this out. Sometimes when they object to the price, that's not the objection at all. So early on, you need to smoke it out. Is that the objection? And you do that simply by saying, well, let me ask you, if there were a way I could show you that the price not only is fair, but actually is more than fair, would you go ahead and take advantage of the offer that we're making to you this evening? Now, or this morning, or whatever. What you're really doing is trying to smoke out the advantage. You're trying to smoke out whether or not the price really is the objection they're raising. Now, let's say they say, well, yeah, the price is the problem that I'm having with it. Then what you do is, if there were a way I could show you how you can legitimately justify this price and take advantage of our offer, would you be willing to go ahead and start enjoying the benefits today? Now, if they say no, then what you need to do is to smoke out the real objection, because price really is not it. But if the answer is yes, then you simply ask the question, well, do you like the product? And most of the time, you're going to get an answer. Well, then the next question, don't you agree that it's difficult to pay too much for something you really like? Now, a lot of times that forces them to start that thought process, and you've just taken one step towards closing that sale. Then if they say yes, then you say, well, it's okay to do something nice for yourself. Now, if the answer is no, then you move into what we call the fear of loss close. And you do that with simply making this statement. Wouldn't you agree that it's better to invest a little more than you had planned instead of less than you should? Now, here's the reason I ask you that question. If you invest a little more than you had planned, you're talking peanuts. If you invest less than you should, and the service or product you buy won't do the job you need it to do, then you literally have lost everything. Now, if the prospect says the price is still too high, then you move to what we call the how much too much close. For example, for 15 years, I was in direct sales. I sold heavy-duty stainless steel cookware, and it carried a premium price for a very justifiable reason. And a lot of times the prospect would say, well, yeah, your product is too much. And I'd say, well, give me a figure. How much too much? And they'd say, well, $200 too much. Now, I would always write the $200 down. And then let me give you this little bit of data. I had a policeman take his .45 and shoot my little 8-inch frying pan from a distance of 12 feet, and had a documented statement, notarized, saying that he had done that, and you could just barely see the dent in that little pan. And so I had shown that to the prospects in the process of the demonstration. And I said, let me ask you, you say $200 too much. How long do you think this set of cookware is going to last you? And invariably they say, well, I think it'll last forever. Then I would say it certainly would last you at least 20 years, wouldn't it? And invariably they say, yeah, I don't think you'd have any trouble with that. Well, if you invest $200 too much over a 20-year stretch, what that amounts to is about $10 a year. And if you break that into pennies, it means really that for just 3 cents a day, you can go ahead and have the finest equipment that you can get anywhere at any price. Now, if the prospect still objects or still says, well, it's too high, then I would ask him this. I would say, now, let me ask you this question. Do you ever eat out? And invariably, they would say, oh, yeah, we frequently go out to dinner. Then I would simply say to them, well, let me ask you, do you tip the waitress? Invariably, they say, or waiter. They say, oh, yeah, we always tip. Well, this was a number of years ago, and so I would use a lower price. I would say, well, now, how much do you generally tip? And they would say, well, at least $1. And I would say, well, now, let me tell you what you're giving $1 for. That is to have the food brought from the kitchen and put on the table. You brought the silverware and the china out. They served you water and coffee, but they served. Now, you give her $1 for doing that, or him $1 for doing that. Your wife went to the store. She bought the food. She brought it home. She carefully prepared it. She cooked the meal. She brought it to the table and served the meal. Then she's got to take it up and wash the dishes. Now, remember, this was many years ago before a lot of the ladies were working as they're doing today, and the husbands didn't give them much help at all in that kitchen. Most of them still don't give them very much help. But then I would simply say, if you would tip that served person $1 for bringing the food from the kitchen to the table, don't you think your wife deserves at least 3 cents for doing all of those other things? I got to tell you, we got some pretty exciting results as a result of using that particular clothes. Now, if the prospect says, well, the price is still too high, then I would go to this one. Well, now, let me ask you, are you concerned about the cost, or is it the price that you're concerned about? And a lot of times they would say, well, what's the difference? Now, I would always use, and incidentally, the reason I moved to the board, and what I encourage you to do, anytime you see me use this board to illustrate a point, or use graphics to illustrate a point, that says to you that you need to be letting your prospect see you writing something when you're showing figures. And the reason is we've been conditioned to believe what we see and doubt what we hear. Now, if they see it and hear it, see it as logic, hear it as emotion, you put the two together and you got a better chance of making the sale. So the prospect says, well, what do you mean? Is it cost or price we're concerned about? Then I simply say, and here's the example I use because it happened in my life, I encourage you to get one out of your industry that specifically fits you. I say, well, now, when my son was 6 years old, we went down to the Swin bicycle place to get him a bicycle. They told us it was $64.95. Well, years ago, that was an enormous price to pay for a bicycle. Just to teach a 6-year-old how to ride, he's going to tear it up anyhow. So I went down to a discount store, and there I priced a bicycle for $34.95. Now, this price is obviously considerably less than that. And again, I'm showing them they're seeing it and hearing it. Now, it was a nice little bicycle. About 60 days later, we went back to that little bicycle store because we wanted to get the handlebars replaced. And they said, well, you know, it's in warranty and not going to cost you anything. Well, 30 days later, we had to go back and get more new handlebars, no longer a warranty, and so now the price is $4.50 higher, and at this point, we have got, let me see, $39.45 invested in that bicycle. Well, about 3 months later, the entire sprocket apparatus, the brakes and all of that, came completely kazip. We went back to the little bicycle store, and this time it came to roughly $15, and now we've got $54.45 invested in that bicycle. Well, about a month later, the bearings in the front wheel went kazip. We went back down to the little bicycle store, and they said it'd be about $5. I'd forgotten. I threw in the towel at that point, and I said, no way. Then we went and bought the Swim bicycle for $64.95. My 6-year-old son rode that bicycle. He raised the handlebars, took the fenders off, and made a dirt bike after about 5 years out of it. He rode that bicycle regularly for the next 5 years, and periodically he rode it for 10 years. The only other expense we had, literally, were 2 tires for that bicycle. Now, let's look at what I've just said. The price of this one was considerably more than the cheaper bicycle. The cost of this bicycle right here, for 6 months, it cost us $54.45, or $9 per month for him to ride that bicycle. In 10 years, this bicycle cost $64.95, or the cost was $6.50 per year. Now, Mr. Prospect, let me ask you again. Is it price or is it cost you're concerned with? Now, the reason I stress that so strongly is simply this. A lot of people can beat us on price, but nobody can beat us on cost. And since price is a one-time thing and cost is a lifetime thing, don't you really want the best possible lowest cost that really is effective? Now, let's say you don't have time to do all of those things as far as dealing with price. Let's say you're at a counter somewhere and you've only got a few seconds to make the sale, and the prospect simply says, well, the price is a little high, and you just have that one moment. You look your prospect right in the eye and you simply say to them, you know, Mr. Prospect, many years ago, our company made a very basic decision. We decided that it would be easier to explain price one time than it would be to apologize for quality forever. Now, I'll bet you're glad we made that decision, aren't you? I'm telling you, folks, I've sold a lot of merchandise with that particular close. It really does work. Let me emphasize a point. People do make emotional decisions. For example, we griped and complained when they started making us wear our seat belts in automobiles. I've never heard anybody gripe about wearing a seat belt in an airplane. And yet the truth is, if you have a wreck in a car with your seatbelt on, the odds are 3 to 1 that it's going to prevent more serious injury, perhaps even save your life. Now, on an airplane, 30,000 feet up, you got your seatbelt fastened, and that sucker comes down. I'm here to tell you that seatbelt's not going to do you any good at all. We do make emotional decisions. Now, again, if we can put emotional and logic together, we're going to be in business. Eb Jackson from Tucson, Arizona, is in the life insurance business, and he was telling me he used this very specific close to make the biggest sale of his career. And incidentally, he said he was kind of dragging bottom at that particular point. He called on this couple and made the presentation on the biggest contract he had ever offered. And the objection they brought up was simply the price is too high. And then Ab simply looked at them and lowered his voice and said, many, many years ago, our company made a very basic decision. They decided it would be easier to explain price one time than it would be to apologize for poor service for the rest of your life. I'm glad they made that decision, Mr. Prospect, and I'll bet you are too. Ab said it worked beautifully. Now, I'd like for you to please understand this. Every close won't work for everybody selling everything. Your experience, your judgment, and your common sense will be the determining factors. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, Ziegler, why do we need to know so many closes anyhow? Well, let me give you a basic reason for that. Dr. Herb True did some research at Notre Dame University. He discovered that only 4% of all of the salespeople in America will ask for the order 5 or more times. Now, I want to emphasize something. They do not necessarily ask those 5 times in the same interview. There are many presentations where, in fact, you do not ask for the order simply because you're gaining information so that you can make a legitimate proposal to them. When you're talking thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, you don't walk in, make a presentation very many times, and walk out with a multi-million-dollar contract, though it does happen, especially if you expect it to happen. But what Dr. True discovered was simply this. Those who ask for the order over a period of time, sometimes in one sitting, more often in 2 or 3 sittings, at least 5 times, those 4% closed over 60% of all of the sales, meaning simply that they made over 60% of all of the income. You got to ask for the order. When I first got started in selling, one of the first things I was told was you close early, you close often, and you close late. How many of you have ever been told that, especially when you first got started in selling? Yeah. Well, the question comes up, how early is early? Let me emphasize this as strongly as I can emphasize it. You never ask for the order until you have given them some legitimate logical reason for giving you a yes answer. If you've not given them value before you ask for the order, you come across as a high-pressure type salesperson. I want to get this over and move on to the next prospect. Now, that's one of the reasons you give that value first. Because once the prospect has said no, a little barrier goes up. You can get over it, but it is more difficult than if the barrier had never been raised. So give value before you ask for the order. And that leads us into what I call, is that fair enough close? You do build that value before you ask for the decision. But let me simply say this. It's okay, it's even wise to let the prospect know in advance, maybe, that you're going to ask for the order. For example, years ago, things were slightly different than what they are today. When I was in the life insurance business, we used to do the fact-finding interview, and then we would go back with a proposal. And I would always have it in a beautiful folder. And when I went back, then I would take the proposal like so, and I would say, I have prepared a proposal for you. Then I would pull out a plain sheet of paper like so. And this is where I'm saying it's okay, it's even wise, particularly if you can go ahead and if you've done a lot of research before you get there and let them know in advance you're going to ask for the order. So I'd pull out this sheet of paper and I'd say, now, Mr. and Ms. Prospect, as you can see, I got a plain sheet of paper. There's obviously nothing there to explain. There's nothing there that you would not understand because there's nothing there. Here's a promise I'm going to make you. I'm going to promise you that when I finish this proposal to you, that it's going to be just as clear, just as plain as that blank sheet of paper is at this moment. And if it is that clear, and if it is that plain, then I'm going to ask you, if you see it is in your best interest to go ahead, I'm going to ask you this evening or this morning or whatever to make that decision. Is that fair enough? I'd like to inject a little extra right here. I would like to inject a close I call simply the "you've got an answer for everything" close. Now, here's what I mean. Sometimes you've answered several objections, and you've impressed the prospect with just how much you know about what you're talking about. And so many times, half in admiration and half in exasperation, the prospect will look at you and say, well, it doesn't make a difference what I say. You've got an answer for everything. How many of you have ever had somebody say that to you, all right? You're that close to making the sale, but you're that close to missing it. If you modestly admit that you were number one in the region last month, you just blew it. If a prospect says that, regardless of whether it's in admiration or exasperation, you quietly look them in the eye and you say to them, well, you know, I really appreciate that comment. I'm going to take it as a compliment. But the truth is there are many things I do not have the answer for. That's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about selling a product or service, which is the answer to your problem. And that's what you really want, isn't it? You convert it, you've now made it a very positive close. A number of years ago, I was traveling through St. Louis, Missouri. I was changing planes, had a little extra time, looked down at my shoes, realized I needed a shoe shine. Walked into the shine stand. Young man escorted me to my seat. He made the change for his previous customer. I had a chance to look at the prices of the shoe shine. 75 cents, this was about 12 years ago. 75 cents was the regular shine, $1 was the wax shine, and $2 was the spit shine. Well, I figured I'd get the regular shine for 75 cents, tip the guy a quarter, and I'd be on my way. He came to me, and incidentally, I called this the shame close. He came to me, and then he said, which one? I said, regular. Now, you're talking about voice inflection. The young man backed up and said, regular. Well, I knew right then I was in for an unusual shoe shine, but I wasn't about to let that guy get the best of me, so I said, yeah, you guys do such a marvelous job here. I know it's going to be fabulous, and I'll be on my way. Well, the guy didn't say a thing, didn't even grunt. He just started putting the saddle soap on my shoes, and he started cleaning them. And as he did, he said, man, these are really nice shoes. He said, what kind are they? And I said, well, they're ballasts. He said, boy, he said, they're nice. He said, I bet they're comfortable, aren't they? I said, they ought to be. He said, cost a lot of money. I said, do they ever cost a lot of money? And he went on cleaning the shoes, you know. Then he reached up and he felt the pant leg. And he said, man, he said, that is really a nice piece of cloth. And I said, well, it ought to be, too. He said, what kind is it? And I said, well, it's a Hickey Freeman. He said, man, those suckers cost a lot of money. I said, yeah, I know they do, but this one's got some special cloth in it, makes it even more expensive. But I've already been wearing this suit about 5 years, and you still can't see any problem with it. Well, he said, man, he said, that's nice. And then he started the shining process, and he was just a shining away, and he was a popping, you know, and when they're popping, that's not shining. I shine shoes in the Navy. I know when you're shining shoes. That's a sales talk. He's trying to attract the crowd from outside. So he was just a popping away, and all of a sudden he backed away, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, you know, this seemed like a shame. Man will spend over $100 on a pair of shoes. Spend several $100s to get a nice suit of clothes. And all he's trying to do is look nice. Then he won't spend another $1 to get the best shine in the whole world. I said, spit on him, man. Spit on him. Well, now, folks, you know, when you get a 75-cent shine, a 2-bit tip, that's fine. But when you got a $2 shine, nobody with class gives a 2-bit tip. So I gave him a $3, you know, and as I walked out, you know, I was really picking them up and putting them down. I was feeling pretty good, you know. I looked up at the clock, and as I did, it clicked straight up and down 10 o'clock. Now, the reason I mention that is because when I sat down, I noticed it was exactly 3 minutes until 10. I was in his chair 3 minutes. I gave him $3. Now, you don't have to be a Phi Beta Kappa from MIT to figure that one out. That is $60 an hour. Did you realize that's what we were paying our psychiatrists back then? Of course, this guy does some good. But, you might say, but Zig, he doesn't shine 20 pair of shoes an hour all day long. Okay, but you figure, let's cut that half in two. Instead of 60, he makes 30. Cut that half in two. He doesn't make 30, he makes 15. And you take $15 an hour and cut that half in two, and I know he does more. You know what that adds up to? It adds up to right at $20,000 a year, shining shoes. And I got something to tell you, friends. If that dude ain't making at least 30, ain't a dog in Georgia. I mean, he is shining a lot of shoes. But now let me point out two very sound things about him. His name is Johnny. I asked him his last name. I knew Johnny because it had his name on his name tag there. He said, I'm not going to tell you. If I tell you both names, you'll forget them both. If you'll always remember Johnny, though. He was a professional. He's the only shoeologist I've ever seen. Now, the reason I know he was a shoeologist, he had it right there on his name tag, Johnny, shoeologist. But let me point out a couple of things. He was a superb workman. He delivered everything he sold. That's important. Number two, he was a professional salesperson, and those two things merit it. But what I'm really saying is, if a gentleman in a job like that can make that kind of money, look at what we in the profession who have products and goods and services that extend to us infinitely greater opportunities, look what we can do. But the story doesn't end there. A few months later, I was back in the St. Louis airport. I walked in this time. There's no other shine guy around, no other customer. I'm the only one. Now, by then, they've changed the prices and structure just a little bit. It simply says, best shine, $2. I sat down and he said, what kind? Well, I didn't want to go through that routine again. So I said, just give me your best. Well, as he was shining, I was bragging on him. You know, I discovered a long time ago that behavior which is recognized and rewarded is repeated. And so I wanted the best possible shine. So we had quite a little conversation. As a matter of fact, he got carried away and he just kept shining, kept shining, kept shining. And finally I said, Johnny, I got to go. He said, okay, and he finished it up. As I stepped down, he said, he said, I noticed you hung up an overnight bag when you sat down. I said, yeah. He said, you're spending the night in St. Louis? I said, yeah. He said, I was just wondering if you had another pair of shoes in your bag. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. He said, you know, it'd really be a shame to have the best looking shine in St. Louis tonight and then just look like one of the gang tomorrow. He said, won't take me but a moment. I call that the extra clothes. Now, a lot of times as salespeople, we overlook the fact that we have other goods and products and services. We skim the surface, and leave more money on the table, more needs on the table that need to be met than we are actually reaching. Don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting you try to sell everybody everything you've got every time you make that call on them. But they're buying, if you're selling products that you know they're buying from someone else, think of the time and effort you can save them if you can become more of a service person to them, selling them more of the things they're buying already anyhow. It is a service. You really can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want. Then I'd like to share with you what I call the marriage close. I was in the insurance business. One of the things used to frustrate me, I'd spend a lot of time preparing a proposal and making the presentation. Get down to the close, and the prospect would say, well, Mr. Ziegler, I hate to tell you this, but my wife's second cousin's got a neighbor whose boyfriend's son, his dad, has a brother who is selling life insurance. And if we buy anything, we'll have to buy from them. Well, I knew it was just a stall. They weren't going to buy any life insurance from anybody. And so what I did then was simply this. I remembered a book I'd read by Frank Bettger many years ago called How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. This is the reason salespeople need to be students. They need to be learning all the time. It is a profession, and it's a profession that changes. And Frank Bettger had a statement in his book, I would tell you this if you were my own brother. He also had another statement in there simply, this is what I would do if I were you. Now what Frank Bettger had done, he would make appointments before he ever made the call. For that prospect, he would say to the prospect, I can do something for you right now that no other insurance person in Philadelphia can do. And they would say, what's that? Well, I've made an appointment already for you to be examined tomorrow afternoon, promptly at 3 o'clock, by the only physician in Philadelphia who can give you agreement and approval right now that this amount of insurance is going to be placed in force. I stole a page from him, and I would say to the prospect, I can do something for you right now that no other insurance person in the world can do. Obviously, they'd say, what's that? I would say, I can marry you. The old boy would say, you would what? Now I would reach over and I'd pick up a certificate of marriage, which I had already prepared. And the certificate of marriage would simply say, on this 28th day of August, 1993 or 2 or whenever, I, Zig Ziglar, agreed to marry John and Mary Smith. By this marriage, I agree to be available in time of need. I agree to stay abreast of all the tax developments and Social Security changes as they relate to the needs of John and Mary Smith. I agree to assume responsibility for giving them the best advice my professional knowledge will permit. And I would simply say, the only thing that you agree to is this, to give Zig Ziglar the privilege of earning the right to serve. You put your okay here, we're in business. It was hilarious what generally happened. The old boy invariably would slap his leg and he'd say, honey, what about that? This dude wants to marry us. He wants to marry both of us. Mr. Ziegler, now this is legal. They're not going to get us for bigamy, are they? I'd go right along with it. I'd say, no, I've already cleared it with the insurance commissioner, the governor of the state. I've even talked about it with my brother-in-law. He says it's okay. And invariably, with a big laugh and a huge flourish, he would sign the marriage certificate. I beautifully typed his name in. It was on Corinthian script. It was beautiful parchment paper. Interestingly enough, I never once had a marriage certificate signed that I did not get the application signed. Now, how can you take that and use it in your life? Well, Hockfield and Associates is a firm up in Chicago, in the Chicago area. And Wes Finster, that Hockfield and Associates, is the gentleman who made this particular sale. He called on these people, and he was not getting any results at all. They sell private labels of various products to company, and here were the terms of agreement. When you buy a private label program from Hockfield and Associates and the Nice Pack Company, you also buy me. I am literally going to be married to the Shopco account. I will see that you receive the following: the finest products available for Shopco's valued customers, the best possible service, the fairest price, and he went right on down the list. And when we got to the bottom of it, he would simply say, and this is all you need to do to put this in force. First year, they sold over $500,000 worth of merchandise. They'd been calling on them for years. I've had any number of clients to say, this works. See, the marriage indicates that you're not going to hit and run, that you're going to be a permanent person with them. It ties it together. The marriage close has worked and works well. There's no such thing as a little sale. But it is safe to say that we will miss 100% of all of the sales we don't ask for. Very few prospects are going to demand that we take their order. That does happen occasionally, but it is very rarely. Chris Hegarty says that 63% of all sales interviews end without a direct ask for the order. At this point, I would like to share with you what I believe is a very significant close. It's called the pressure belief close. At this point, what I want to simply say to you is that we've had some ideas, some procedures, and some stimulation. But when I talk about a pressure belief close, it happened in Australia. I was with my friend John Nevin. He was with World Book Encyclopedia. He told me of what happened to him when his career first got started as a World Book salesperson, and he went on to become the managing director. Called on a little German couple. They really were more like grandparents. They'd been in Australia a very brief time. Their English was not real good. The little lady was 51 years old. She had given birth to their one and only child when she was nearly 45 years old. A very little short lady. Had language difficulty. He called on them at roughly 9 o'clock in the evening. It was way past midnight when he left with the order. As he started to leave, she put her hand up on his shoulder. She had walked him through the front yard because they had a vicious dog, got him outside the gate. She reached up and put her hand on his shoulder. And I can't emulate that guttural German accent, but in essence it went like this. Thank you. Thank you, young man, for stay with us till we know what these books do for our boy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Pressure belief is simply this. It's when you believe so fervently and so completely that that prospect is going to benefit the most by buying from you, that you are willing to kind of put your ego on the line. You're willing to take a slight risk even on occasion of offending someone by asking for the order again. Now let me stress something. You got to do it pleasantly. You got to do it politely. You got to do it professionally. You must by all means do it with that person's interest at heart. But if you really believe they're the winner, you will become so professional in what you do. You will learn so many closes that you will be able, basically, to go forward with the conviction that you are rendering them a service. Now, only experience, judgment, and common sense will dictate to you what is the proper time and what is the proper amount. You'll never get experience by listening to a trainer or watching one of the videos, which I do. You will get ideas. You will get techniques. You will get procedures. Now, if you really want to build a sales career and substantially improve your sales, it's time to go to work. I encourage you not only to read, but to study Secrets of Closing the Sale and my other book, Ziegler on Selling. Now, the reason I say that is this. You can learn a lot of closes and procedures and techniques, but unless you understand the philosophy and the psychology behind them, you will only be partially as effective. You will need to read the exact words many times. There are literally over 140 closes and over 800 questions in these two books that will help you to lead people to those decision tables. And then in order to get the voice inflections down, we have made audio cassettes of each of these videos, and while you're in your car, you need to be listening to them over and over and over. The SMEI International, Sales and Marketing Executives International, says the average professional salesperson spends 510 hours a year in the automobile. That means you literally can make it your sales university. You can learn procedures and techniques. You will really be able to make it a part of you so you can automatically and instinctively respond. You also are going to need to work very much with your manager, your associate, or your trainer. If you're one of these people who happens only to be working independently by yourself, I encourage you to get in front of the video, look it over, take those notes, and then start compiling your own ideas to go along with the specifics that we are presenting here. The reason I want you doing all of these things, when you see something, you'll remember it. When you hear it, you forget it. But if you see it and hear it and do it, you'll understand it. that means you will close more sales. So if you do that, I can close as I always close by saying, you do these things and I'll see you. And yes, I really do mean you at the top. Thank you, and God bless you.